My name is Anthony DeOrsey. I'm the research manager at Cleantech Group. Cleantech Group is a research-driven organization. We conduct research in the fields of energy and power, materials and chemicals, agriculture and food, resources and environment, and transportation and logistics. We conduct our research in a bottom-up way. Our team of analysts goes out, talks to innovators, talks to investors and corporates, really tries to understand what's broken in the market today and why innovation needs to exist and how some of the technologies that are being developed today can solve those problems. What I think we've seen over the past year or so is that there's been a really true acceleration towards more technologies aimed at manufacturing and industry. And this has two flavors to it. The first is that we need to manufacture far more of the technologies to support the energy transition. If you think of solar panels, batteries for electric vehicles and energy and storage, and any of the materials that are going to be involved in machinery like hydrogen electrolyzers, there's a huge imperative to be manufacturing these, and there's a lot of goals to manufacture all of this onshore in the US. So this is one of the first areas where we've seen a lot of momentum. Everything from novel materials to use of more abundant materials in the formulations of these technologies, new ways to access them as well. And we're also seeing a lot happening in circularity, the reuse of materials from end-of-life machinery and equipment. Then there's a second piece to this, is that heavy industry accounts for a huge amount of global emissions. Just here in the US, industry accounts for 23% of direct emissions. That's emissions from a process, use of a fuel typically. But also 30% of indirect emissions, and that's use of electricity from the grid typically, that is emitting elsewhere. So solving the challenge of industrial emissions is a huge challenge, and it's going to require a lot of technologies in the stack to achieve that. So a few things we're very interested in. We're looking a lot at things like thermal energy storage, which can store heat at high temperatures, high enough to then supply heat into a process like steel, cement, or glass making. This solves one piece of the equation, and that's going to be the heat that goes into an industrial process. The other piece of the equation is going to be point source emissions. That's emissions that come out of a process. And that's where we see exciting things happening in steel and cement, things like companies like Boston Metal and Sublime Systems that have landed in our Global Cleantech 100 this year. So it's a space that we're very excited about, and we're really going to be kicking up our research on some of these areas in 2024. One of the first spaces that we look at in industrial and manufacturing technology is the technology necessary to manufacture new technologies for the energy transition. So if you think electric vehicle batteries, batteries for the grid, any type of alternative fuels like hydrogen or electrofuels, all of these have a hardware component that ostensibly should be manufactured locally in the market where they're going to be used. There's a lot of things happening here in the US right now around onshoring of critical materials. This is a space we've looked at very closely, from things like direct lithium extraction, looking at companies like Summit Nanotech, Mangrove Lithium, companies that landed on our Global Cleantech 100 in 2024. We're also looking at some of the further downstream technologies for recovery of materials after end-of-life use of these technologies. New types of processes like electrochemical processing that Ncycle, another Global Cleantech 100 company, is innovating in. One of the areas we're also very excited about in 2024 are technologies that can create industrial decarbonization. You typically tend to have emissions in industrial processes from two sources. One is the heat required to produce an item, and the other is the emissions that come from the process itself, usually from a chemical reaction that has to take place. So in the first bucket, we're looking at technologies, be it hydrogen, other alternative fuels, or potentially some direct electrification to remove that need to have high heat in the process. One space that we're very excited about is in thermal energy storage. If you look at some of the companies that were in our Global Cleantech 100 companies like Rondo Energy, they're storing very high temperatures in a storage medium versus needing to burn a fuel. So this is very promising, and we're seeing a lot of progress here. We're going to be following it closely in 2024. Now, the other side of the equation is point source emissions. So today that's typically addressed by some type of carbon capture, use, and storage, which is expensive and most likely is not going to be a long-term solution. There's exciting things happening here. If we look at Global Cleantech 100 companies this year like Boston Metal, They're in the steel space using a molten oxide electrolysis process to produce steel with an electrical process versus a high heat one. An analog to that in the cement space is Sublime Systems, a cement company that is also using electrolytic processes to produce cement at ambient temperatures. So you're reducing the need for high heat, but you're also not having the point source emissions of carbon going up into a flue gas. So technologies like this that might not necessarily take hold in the market for another few years, but they're still very important for the long-term decarbonization, especially of new facilities, we're also keeping a very close eye on.